which I think if you go back, it suddenly exploded internationally some 12, 13 years back. And now when you try to search on Google or something on Nordic crime, it comes up as Nordic noir, which seems to be the really a well-established way of describing Nordic crime writing. But it's not only in literature. We have the same thing in film and particularly in TV. So we have famous TV series like the Killing, The Bridge, 1, 2, 3, 4, I think, and also Trapped. Some examples of something which is described as noir. And we also see that a number of the authors published as Nordic noirs are selling very big numbers. In some ways, it possibly started, at least some say, with Stieg Larsson's famous Millennium series, not in the sense that it was the first Nordic noirs in any way. That probably goes back to the 60s on the books, but that was at least the time when it seemed like the branding took off of the whole thing. So we have a very interesting panel here to discuss with us noir. We have 3 authors, and then we have one who is basically working to promote translations of their works into other languages. So it's Oda Harald Hauge, who's a Norwegian crime author. We have Carin from Sweden, Minna Lindgren from Finland, and then we have Oliver Moystad from Norway, who is the one who's working on the translation side. The first thing, maybe, which the whole thing about Nordic noir, and since we are basically here discussing promotion of books, it's a question of whether is this really a genre, or is it a branding, or is it a mix? We had a funny situation before we met here, because I sent out a few questions to the authors here, which they could reflect on before we met, and Minna came back to me and said that I'm happy to reflect on it, but I'm really not a noir writer. And then I did a search on her on the internet, and according to her English language publisher, she was a Scandic crime writer, and when you search on that, you end up with Nordic noir as the only thing. So I don't know who's going to start, or Harald, maybe if you have some reflection. Is this a brand, or is this a genre?
It has become a brand because it's useful for publishers, and I never heard of it as a brand before now. But I think it has become a brand, and it says something when you call it Nordic or Scandinavian, and you expect something, but you may not deliver exactly what is expected, and that can be the problem of a brand. So if you buy a Nordic and you get something completely different, but it's helpful in selling. I think that's why publishers love to use it.
Well, then, when I spoke to the authors before, and the only one who claimed to be actually a classic Nordic noir is Carin, so maybe you could say something, your reflections.
Yeah, I'd say that it's definitely a genre, definitely, because it's all about the darker sides of the Nordic countries, definitely, but it has become a brand too, and I think that's due to Stieg Larsson, of course, but I agree with you, he wasn't the first by any means, but he made the torpedo effect, the explosion came after his Millennium trilogy.
And Minna, you are not a noir writer, but still your take on it.
If my publisher in English says I'm a Nordic noir writer, that's okay with me. Anything that sells, you know. But a writer doesn't really, at least I don't, when I start writing, decide this is my genre. I will write like Henning Mankell. No, I write my story, and that's my main focus in my books are actually people over 90 years. So I'm writing about really old people. There's a crime plot, yes, and if it's easier to sell it by comparing it to this brand, I think that's just normal marketing. And I'm very happy that the Swedes who started this have taken all the Nordic countries with, so I can take some advantage of this great brand.
But Carin, if you said that you are the classic genre writer among the trio here, if you could say something about how do you define the Nordic noir then?
Well, when I started writing, I didn't have it defined for me, right? I just wanted to write crime. I wrote crime, and then they got a brand stamp on them, so they became Nordic noir. But it's police fiction. It's a team of police officers who solve crimes, basically. So, and my books are very, very dark. So it's from the reverse side of Sweden, you might say. It's not, you know, rich and elegant people committing crimes. It's really the dark side of Sweden that I describe in my novels. So, and then they got this stamp, Nordic Noir, which is a brand as well.
Well, of course, it is slightly ironic in one way is that when it comes to the crime literature and films from the Nordic countries, they really focus on the dark aspects of the society, and we have. You may be tempted to say that it contrasts very much with the realities, because we have on all kind of international rankings we had. The Nordic countries normally are ranked on the top. I mean, just this week we got a new ranking out of Davos, where the 5 Nordic countries got the 5 first place when it comes to the most inclusive economies. We are also, just as a contrast, we are also, according to the rankings, the happiest people in the world, but we have the darkest literature. I think, Harald, we spoke a bit on it before, and you have been philosophizing a bit around that.
I think it's not so peculiar if you look at our way of life. I have some slides I would like to show you. It may not work. Okay, out there, I lift my arm, then you change, okay? As you told me, it wouldn't work. Okay. This is the reality of Scandinavia. If you think of the way we live, the climate we have, it's quite strange that we are scoring the highest on happiness. Am I going in the wrong direction? Yes, I am. Typical day in Norway. You can see he's bending over in happiness. On his way home to write one of his novels. And you see this is a winter day in a Norwegian village, and it's quite obvious that there could be some crime here. And people are not meeting in restaurants or in tea shops because there are none. And if there were, they would probably freeze to death on the way there. So they sit at home in semi-darkness, watching the noir movies with a bottle of vodka, and contemplating killing the neighbor. And next morning when they go to work, this is what meets them. And then you clear the car, and you discover it's the neighbor's car you cleared. And this, of course, makes for a very happy life. And then we go skiing, of course. Very enjoyable. And you can see the broad smiles on people when they get out into the nature. But we have some fun, of course. This is summer. And they have managed to clear the roads across the mountains. You know, midsummer, June, I think this is a couple of weeks before midsummer. You know, you have a few weeks of nice weather, and then it gets dark again. This is middle of the day in northern Norway now. This is not something that makes you happy. If you may see a glimmer of light on the horizon, but again, you may not. And I'm not joking, this is noon. This is also noon. Very inviting and very nice for those who love this, and they are not many. Fortunately, we have managed to turn some of this into an attraction. This is the Northern Light, as you know, and this has become a big tourist attraction. So maybe this is what keeps our happiness alive during the winter months, just the prospect of seeing this a couple of times. So at least I have tried to give you a small explanation on why we are so noir.
Or we could rather say that this kind of feeds on the imagination, since the reality seems to be slightly different. Carin, do you have any views of why are we so noir when we are writing literature or crime literature?
Well, I don't know, but when I refer to the Harald's pictures here, one could easily imagine that people get depressed in the Nordic countries during winter time, right? So you surprise me a little bit when you say that we are the happiest people of the world, because we are not that happy at winter, are we?
Norway was just declared the happiest population in the world.
Yeah.
I think that's in summer and spring and maybe autumn. Anyway, but the darkness that we have at winter time, we have the sunshine all 24 hours at summertime, so I guess it weighs up maybe. But well, as any country, we also have poor people and people not very well fortuned and so on. So of course there is crime everywhere in the world, also in the Nordic countries. So that's what we are writing about, I guess, the Nordic noir authors, because crime normally takes place at the darkest places in a country as well.
But does this mean that really the Nordic crime writing isn't particularly more dark than crime writing from any other geographic area?
No, I don't think so, but I think the Nordic noir authors have a certain way of getting inside people's heads, I think we write from the perspective, many of us write from the perspective of inside the main characters' heads. And that's a specific way of doing it, instead of more like action-driven narratives that you could see very often in, for example, American literature and so on. So, and I think that way of writing from the inside perspective makes it a little bit darker, because you have to follow the thoughts, not just the actions, not just the fists or the knife or that. It's more from an inside perspective. I think it makes it darker.
Minna?
I think there are at least two things that make Nordic crime books interesting to other people, I mean internationally. One is that they come from the safest countries from the world. There's a twist. This is of course interesting. If you compare that to, we had a crime book about drug dealing in Colombia, that's not very surprising. There's something, wow, why is it happening in these countries? And then it's what you said, the psychological thing. The main characters are usually very twisted too. And we get, when we read more and more about them, because it's always a series of books, and it's not just the crime that is in focus. In focus is the main character and the society. And I think it's a very Nordic to be quite critical towards the society. Even if we have the best societies in the world, we tend to think we could make something better and this is not good. And we are very critical, and I think this criticism towards society is very strong in all Nordic literature, but especially in the Nordic noir, which makes it a little bit, you could say, deeper than a normal detective storybook.
So it involves the society to a greater extent than other crime literature then?
Yeah, I think so.
I think so. Yes.
It's very typical. It's, in a way, it's not surprising that quite many of the writers we used to be journalists. It's a connection with the journalistic attitude towards facts and society and criticism.
And of course, here we have two ex-journalists
Yeah.
among you. Oliver, you had...
Well, this is a tradition that started with Sjöwall och Waller, the famous Swedish crime writers in the 70s. That they were very using the crime stories to analyze problems in society. So it's a long tradition for that. And in Norway, we have a crime writer who's translated to English, Gunnar Staalesen, who has his Raymond Chandler-like noir detective, but he is also, in one way, acts like a social worker, taking care of children, having the perspective of society on the, what you would say, people with on the bottom of the society, or who are the weaker part of the society. And this is something typical for many crime writers.
But is it this kind of critical attitude to society which is attractive to other countries when it's selling so well?
To other countries?
Yeah, this critical attitude towards society in the Nordic crime literature, which makes it attractive to other countries?
It's part of it, and I think another part is what you say with that it's also often not so much plot-driven, but psychology-driven, character-driven, that you get more depth in the writing, that the writers take the perspective from a psychological perspective. It's not just violence and blood and killings, it's also psychology and real people, which makes it more interesting. And there's been a lot of speculation about why is crime writing so strong in Scandinavia, in these countries with so little real crime. And probably that's part of the answer, that crime is read as entertainment, and you can read it as entertainment when the reality is not like that. In Colombia, you would not want to read about kidnappings and killings because it happens outside on the street all the time. It's not entertaining anymore. So that's probably one reason why there's so much crime writing in Scandinavia.
Yeah, it's tempting to say that, for instance, maybe the most famous Norwegian crime writer at the time, being at least the most sold, Jo Nesbø, normally in his books you will have, in a country where you have 25 murders per year, he probably fills up half that quota in every book. So. But coming again to discussing this thing of selling the literature then abroad, is the branding, the fact that now for 10-15 years we have had this international brand of Nordic noir, does that help sell books? Are people coming, for instance, you are furthering translations of book. So, people who want to translate, are they out looking for somebody to fill the gap of Nordic noir or something, or is that of less importance than who is the author and so forth?
Well, for us, of course, you had Stieg Larsson, who really defined or redefined after Chevalvalde, who was a big international bestseller, and after him, it wasn't really Scandinavian noir; it was Swedish noir, it was Swedish crime that they were looking for. And then came Jon Esbø, and now it's also Norwegian and I guess Finnish. That it's all over Scandinavia, and of course they are looking for the next writer who can sell as they do. But it means once you have these successes, publishers are looking for the next one, and they find other writers who have maybe different qualities, who they then translate and sell. And I think to some extent maybe it's been a bit too much. Maybe it's peaking a bit. This wave of Nordic or Scandinavian crime, Scandinavian noir. We'll see. It's not peaking, but I think the good ones will always survive.
It is a little question, this thing that in other parts of literature also you have a bit of fads. You can feel some kind of fashion. If you go back to the late 70s, early 80s, you had, for instance, magical realism. Everybody wanted to write magical realism, and that went on for 10-15 years. And where is that writing now? Is there a demand for that in the market? Is it a danger that the Nordic noir can face the same outlook?
It can be. Like you've seen in Germany, they translate a lot. And you can see very often that they take a Norwegian or Swedish or Danish or Finnish book, and they put a cover with a red little house on a lake or on the fjord, and then that's branding. Then it's Scandinavia, and the people buy it because it's Scandinavia. And then they read the book, and it may take place in the city. There's no red house, and there's no lake, no nothing. And then I think they do the branding. They go a bit too far. So you will always have that the excesses will have to, people discover that when it has to be content there that fulfills the promise that the marketing gives.
Minna, do you feel you have been helped in getting your books translated by the fact that you are Nordic?
Yes, I think so. And I know I have some publishers in Germany and in Italy and Spain who were interested in my book, firstly because I was from Finland, which was at that time the country where we didn't have the Scandinavian Nordic noir yet. So there's Finland, and that's why they were interested in it. And of course the subject that the really elderly people over 90 years.
Your heroes are between 90 and 100.
Yeah, well, that's a big European problem, what to do with the old people. So there were two reasons. But I think, of course, first we had this Nordic noir peak, maybe. And I think the positive consequences is that now we have a quite wide range of crime books coming from the Nordic countries. You can say my book is soft crime, which is quite popular too. And then maybe just interest in Nordic countries, because that's one trend in the international literature, that people they want to read books from exotic countries that they never visited. And that's one part of, there's the term saying so far tourism or something like that. That people really want to read books that places they never visited. And then when we're talking about marketing, I was in Peru, in Lima, and I was really surprised because I had a gang of fans there in Peru. I didn't even know they can read in Peru. And my fans were young 30 years old boys or men, because Finnish heavy music is really popular there. And they were all fans of these Finnish heavy music bands that I didn't know. But so they thought, something coming from Finland, that must be interesting. And then they read these stories about these 90 years old ladies, and they think, yes, this is cool.
But you have you had a couple of 30-year-old ones working in your
Yes, they have
so that-
somebody they
and they're
can-
male ones, so maybe that was the one they appealed to.
Maybe.
Carin, have you been helped when you first were translated by the fact that you were Nordic?
I'm not sure, actually. I have no idea. I would like to think that my books are selling to foreign countries and in foreign countries because they are good, right? Not because of anything else.
Or good and Nordic?
Well, I don't even like to think that. I think good is enough, isn't
Yeah,
it? But I'm not sure. But maybe I've been helped. I have no idea. But I know one thing, and that is that when I was first published in the English-speaking world, it was mentioned on the cover of the book that it was published in Sweden by the same publisher and by the same actual staff or crew at that publisher, who also published Stig Larsson's Millennium Trilogy. And what I know for a fact is that a lot of bloggers and people rating books on book sites, they dislike that a lot because they thought it was kind of cheating to put that on the cover. I wasn't the guilty one here, but I know that annoyed readers. So I think, that was a bad thing for me. So they took it off.
And what is your experience of Harald?
Well, I come from biographies and adventure books and into crime, so I'm not sure yet. But in my writing, I differ a bit because I think you should write about something you know. And I know nothing about police. I never met a policeman, even in just speed driving. But I know a lot of criminals. And in my view, everyone can become a criminal if they get a chance. All of you would happily become criminals in a smaller or lesser extent, like you would not pay the parking fee if you were 100% sure that no one would come and check. And maybe you would cheat a little bit on the tax reform if you knew that no one would ever find out, and so on and so on. So we all have it inside us somewhere. And I have 3 books that elaborates on this, that in the first book, they just happen to do a crime which they think they will get away with because no one will ever see it, and then it goes downhill from there, which is a bit Nordic also, I would say. When we are so critical of our society, because we are, we also, the heroes in most Scandinavian books are different. They are lonely, single or divorced. They are not very, maybe they have big problems with a boss. They drink too much. They have bad health. They may not have all these characteristics, but they at least have some of them. And I think you would be hard-pressed to find anything of this in other crime literature. So to me, the most differentiating is our characters. And that is also a way of, let's say, criticizing or looking in a critical way of our society, because we don't want to make them heroes.
Although, of course, you have in American crime writing all the time, from Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, you have this heavy drinking outsider as the detective, not so different from much of the Nordic we have. But tell me, Oliver, you are trying to push books on foreign publishers. How do you promote, for instance, how much of the translations, by the way, of the Norwegian translations or novels into other countries are crime literature, of the ones you are helping finance?
Oh, now I must think. Last year Nordla supported 540 titles Of these, around 300 are fiction, and I would say maybe between 30 and 40% would be crime titles, I think. So it's quite a lot. And then you have many crime titles where that, like many of your Nesbø translations, they don't even apply for support because they are so successful. If they get support for translation, it doesn't really matter that they won't get much anymore. So crime is a big part of it, absolutely. And we do most of our promotion. Most of the titles we focus on or talk about are not crime titles because we say that they kind of manage themselves and it's a commercial genre. It shall sell by itself, but we still bring some titles, and we know we can talk about the book, so that if someone asks, we can always give information, and because there is a lot of demand, of course. And we see all the time that publishers want. Maybe they come and want the next Nesbø or the next Stig Larsson, and then they discover, as you say, there is a lot of variety of the topics and the way people write. You can give it the stamp, the branding Nordic noir, but then it's maybe more there. Like we have one writer who, just like you, in Norway, she was actually supposed to be here, Agnes Ravatn. She's written what in Norway is considered a literary book. But there is a mystery in this book with this young woman, sorry, who goes as a housekeeper for a man on a fjord, and his wife is not there. Sorry, I need some water. It's a mystery. Here is so quiet. Thank you. Maybe you can solve the mystery. What happened to the disappearing voice? His wife is not there, and so there's a mystery there. What has happened to this wife? But in Norway it's read as a literary novel, but in Britain it is sold as a Nordic noir. So there the branding works. So we can see that kind of they try to get more into this brand than we would, because it's a genre that sells.
But Minna, you said you were translated to 10 languages, I think. Which are your most successful foreign markets?
I guess it's the most successful is Spanish, both in Spain and in South America, and then because it's a huge area, but also in Spain, and then Italian and German and Czech Republic is very good. So no bad countries for me, but the publishers must have done a little bit something like that. You told that they have to change the covers or change the marketing, because after they bought the scripts, they realized, and got the translation, they realized they are really, my books are humorous books, humor books, and satirical books, and especially in Southern Europe, this is a very strong brand too. To have, they love to read, and French, funny books, although it's a serious subject, but it's in a light way, humorous way of telling, which Finland really is not very famous for. So there's no ready-made brand for this. But maybe Sweden, there's this man called Ove, and many Swedish quite successful international humorous books. So maybe that's the next brand we get.
Yeah, can be. But my compliments that you are so big in Spain and Latin America, because that's usually a difficult market for Nordic writers to break into. But many are translated.
Big and big, it's the best country for me.
Let's say you're big.
Carin, where do you have most fans?
Most fans, I'm not sure that Denmark is a good country. France, I think the English-speaking world has been from now and then, and Czech for me as well, Czech Republic, Iceland, which is a very small country but still good for me. Did I say? Germany? Well, a few. And I have very odd countries too, like Thailand, Japan, China. I'm not sure anybody reads my books there, but they're published anyway, so it's kind of cool to have it on the shelf.
Since I'm here, I hope it will be India. But it's very interesting that everyone is racing to get a publisher abroad. But look at Jon Nesbø. I think he waited 15 years from his first book published in Norway until he did anything abroad. And that was not a bad move. So maybe you should think about that also.
Must just continue to write books.
But also from what you said, that there isn't any kind of hard to say that there is one particular market where this thing with the Nordic noir appeals particularly when you look out. There isn't a, or you, Oliver, who are selling more, being more directly involved with the publishing industry, view on that?
Traditionally, it's been Germany. It's been the most important market, and that's where they have all these books, as I said, with the red little houses on the water. So Germany has been very strong. Holland as well. They do a lot of, translate a lot, and also a lot of crime. France is good. And then recently we see that the English-speaking market is growing a lot. And I think it also has a connection with all these TV series that have been with, that you mentioned, the crime and the bridge, where they, I think for the first time that they have done, sent the series with subtitles and not dubbing, so that the British or the English-speaking audience for the first time understand that it's not originally in English, and that it's set somewhere else. And they also understand that they can hear a different language and like it. And so I think this has spilled over to writing as well, that they kind of suddenly appreciate to read something in translation. Because especially in England, because they've been, well, America as well, they've been so self-centered that foreign languages to them means written in English in other places, written in India or in Australia. That's foreign enough for them, because English is so big. But now they do a lot more translation. So we saw in Norway, in Nordland last year, for the first time, Germany has normally been the biggest market with most titles translated. Last year it was English-speaking countries which were almost twice as big as Germany, with more than 50 titles translated from Norway. And many of them into Indian publishers as well.
Well, it's interesting, the thing you said with the kind of influencing on all the countries, because again, if you go out and search for Nordic noir, you will also find that on the list of Nordic noir writers now you can find, for instance, writers like Peter May, who is very well known in Britain, writing crime stories from where is it, Shetland? And you also have some British crime series on TV, which is said to be Nordic noir. So the kind of the type of writing is spreading a bit then.
Yeah, it seems to be spreading, and that's why I think maybe it will be peaking a bit, because when you have, at least in all these TV series where everything is dark and it's raining all the time and it's always so gloomy that, I mean, they have to, next time they have to think of something that is very scary but light.
But you know, this is another thing, because we were asked by the organizers here to talk about literature more kind of in commercial terms also, and one of the aspects they mentioned was tourism, and of course it's hard to see that this bleak picture in the TV series, and now also when we Odd Harald, when he is trying to explain why we write noir, comes up with this slides, which I guess will not attract that many people to us. So it's does crime writing create an interest in the Nordic countries? Is there any? Can you see any kind of correlation between the success of literature and the interest for people to visit these countries, which obviously have these dark understreams, which are not so easy to face or to see immediately?
I think it's natural if you spend 5, 6, 7 hours reading a book from a special landscape, it gets into your head. So maybe it's not always, you're not conscious about it when you plan your next holiday, but if you read 7 books from Scandinavia the last year, it's a high probability that Scandinavia will be high on your list. So I think it helps, but just going and looking after the same streets that were in Nesbø's book, I don't think that will help a lot, but when it comes out as a movie, maybe yes. Or it is out as a movie.
I know that they are making tours in Stockholm in Stig Larsson's Traps.
And in Ystad also.
And in Ystad for Henning Mankell as well, for Wallander tracks. So it's big in Sweden anyway, for those 2 authors. Not for the rest of us, I think. Not so much anyway. I know a group who has made a journey in my tracks, but that was just one.
If I book a group under a different name than mine next year, you will not be surprised?
Yeah, I would be surprised, but not if you do it in Stig Larsson's blogs. But also, if I think of myself, I'd love to go to Colombia after having watched Narcos. So, I mean, you get influenced. You feel like going there and to see it with your eyes, with your own eyes. So, I'm sure it helps.
And they have tours in Oslo in Jo Nesbø's, or in his, what's his name again, his detective? Harry Hole. And they go in his footsteps, so that they absolutely do. And there was this big film last year, The Snowman, which was supposed to be big, with Michael Fassbender, which seemed to have flopped immediately, so it didn't really have much effect, it seems.
The book is always better.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so unclear. Minna does a crime in a retirement home in Finland attract tourists to Helsinki?
Well, to attract tourists in Helsinki is an impossible task anyway, so no, really. I know there are people, because my characters in the books, they always take a tram route around when they want to get out of the senior house to the real world. So I know people make these tram routes according to my books. But I mean, talking about tourism because of books is a little bit difficult. Of course, books and literature is part of the brand of the country. And as I said, this is a trend in literature to get to know new places by reading books. And if 10,000 people read the book and if 2 comes to Finland, that's good. But it's not, of course, the main aim of this business. And movies and TV series, they are big. They can make bigger movements, really.
Well, of course, from us who are diplomats and basically sent abroad to sell our countries, or at least create interest for the country, it is very interesting. And culture, of course, has this role. I remember many years ago I served in Italy, and there you had a number of, maybe a majority of those who studied to learn Norwegian language, they did it because of their interest in Norwegian black metal, which I thought was a kind of special motivation for learning a language. But maybe there are somebody here who have some questions to the panelists. Yes, there. First.
Hello, my name's Margrethe. I was just wondering whether the noir aspect isn't really limited to crime, because I'm not very broadly read in Norwegian literature, but when I do think of things like Ibsen or Hamsun, I would say, especially Hamsun, is probably the noirest novelist that you would ever want to read. And I'm just also, having been born in Norway but lived all my life outside of Norway, I look at Norwegians with a curiosity, and maybe I have an outside view, but I actually think that possibly Norwegians really are, or Scandinavians, but Norwegians do have a dark, dry sense of humour about the harsh things of life that other countries don't have. And so it's not just the crime that you write, but the voice in which you write it, which has that attraction and that is unique to Scandinavia.
You should really have been up here.
Another time.
I agree, and the fact that Ibsen and Hamsun were really noir shows that it's not going away, it's not peaking and going down.
Yeah, and
So,
yeah, and I think if we should take playwrights, we could add Strindberg in this picture, so we will really have a bit of of darkness here. Some other comments?
Yeah,
yeah.
so just curious to ask this. So initially you mentioned that one of the reasons your crime writing has a particular tone is because you grew up in Scandinavian countries, which is a very quiet setting. So just curious that how different would that have been if you were, let's say, born and brought up in a place like India, where it's completely contrary to the kind of setting you have in Norway? Just out of curiosity, that's it.
Sorry, it was a bit difficult to catch you here. Can you just...
All right, so I'll repeat. So initially, you mentioned that the reason why your writing, the crime writing, has a particular tonality to it is because you guys were born and brought up in Scandinavia, which is a very quiet country. There aren't many people around. You have a very serene setting. Just curious, how different would your crime writing had been if you had been born and brought up in a place, say, like India, a very crowded place, completely contrary to Norway? Just out of curiosity, that's it.
Yes, Carin here.
No, I have no answer to that. How could I? But it was a really interesting question. I mean, I think people are, the Indian people and Swedish people, for example, are not very much alike each other in some ways, but in other ways, we are just humans, so we are obviously very much alike each other. I have no idea what effect that would have on the language or the narrative or anything like that. What do you think?
If you come back on Friday, there is a Swedish writer who lives in India and writing crime from Bangalore. And you come back and ask him the same question.
But he does it very humorous. It's a lot of fun. It's not really noir, is it? But it's fun, still crime, but not exactly. Well, it's noir in a way, but not in the depressive way. And it's different.
But it reflects the fact that he moved from Sweden to India.
Yeah,
So he was writing books in Sweden, I think, first.
I think he was born in Finland and then he moved to Sweden.
Finnish
and then
parents born in Sweden.
All right. Okay. And then he moved to Finland, and then to Denmark, and then to India.
And
There's progress.
Yeah.
you will recognize him because he always has a hat.
Okay, so he found a bit of light when he came to Bengaluru then.
Yeah.
And there was somebody else there?
Yes. Carin, you said that your books are really dark, and this question is to everybody. How do you create that? Do you draw on things in your own life? Do you draw on, real life crime stories, things you read? And when you've done it and while you're writing it, does it bother you?
Minna?
Well, it's easy to me because my books are not dark. So I'm writing about hilarious, happy old people who are curious and clever, and they live in a senior center where there's a lot of crime, but they are not solving the crimes. To solve the crimes is the task of the reader. So I don't have a detective who tells us how it was done. But so I'm very happy when I spend my time with these 90-year-old ladies, no problem. But I agree what was said about the Nordic dark side, and I guess my books are in a way a reaction towards that. The Finnish literature is extremely dark. No murder. If it's a love story, it's a dark one. I think it's. I always thought it's something Slavonic coming from Russia, but if it's in all Nordic countries, it must be the north, the climate, the weather.
Carin.
The question was, how does it affect me to write dark stories, wasn't it?
And where do you get that darkness?
Where do I get it from, and how does it
from?
affect me? Yeah. Well, I get it from the newspapers, or from stories I hear, people telling me, or what I see on the news on telly, and then I, sort of rebake it to fulfill my purposes, because I have a team. It's something I want to tell the reader about. So I cook a little soup of different real cases happened in Sweden. Could be from 1 to 7 different cases. And I put them together, and it would end up differently than they did in reality. If they ever ended up in reality, you never know, because the police might not have solved the case. And does it affect me? Yeah, a lot. If I write sadly, I cry. Of course it affects me, but it doesn't ruin my life. But I'm there for a while, but that's the thing, that's in order to give credibility to the story, is to actually be there in your mind. So.
But just a question on you have 8 books in your series.
Yes.
Did you start up wanting to write a series of 8 books, or did it just develop into that?
No, I started up with the intention to write a series. So I wrote the first 3 of the series at one time. And then I tried to get them published, and they were published, and then I just went on to finishing the series. And I had something like 8 or 10 in mind, and I ended it at 8, actually.
What about you, Minna? You had a trio.
I had in mind a trilogy, and I did it, and my next book is a different one, not noir. It's a love book, love story.
Okay. Oh, Harald, reflections on what goes around in your head when you write?
Not much. No, I like to think that I like to be as realistic as possible. That this could have happened, and it may have happened to anyone. That's why I say we can all become criminals. And as I avoid police in my books, it all centers around how our criminal subconscious drives us on, and it goes downhill. But also there is some hope, because in my books the criminals tend to succeed, and then even make a lot of money. Does that make sense? Because I look around, and I write a lot from finance, and that's a scene where you get away with crime, and you get away with a lot of money on it. So that differs from murders, and it's the dark side of finance.
But you seem differently from the 2 other authors. You write on from your own way, from areas you have background on, because you have been working in finance yourself. You've been a journalist covering that, so that's it. And then your last book is a kind of thriller on climbing the Everest, and you have also been climbing.
Yes, I climbed Everest, so I think you should write about something you really know. And I felt it very much on my body. So I did the trilogy on finance and crime, and then I wanted to do a number 4, but I postponed it a bit. But I will go back to finance type of writing in crime.
Good afternoon. I have a question here.
Yeah.
So all of you are amazing writers from the Scandinavian countries, which are very cold and pretty diverse, different from India. So what is that has intrigued you people to write only about crime? Like you have climbed the Mount Everest, that's amazing. And why only crime? There's so many other topics to write. Ma'am is now writing a book on a love story as well. So what is that intrigues you people to write only about crime? And you've written n number of books on crime.
I don't write only about crime. I done it for a while, but I finished the series, and now I've been writing a children's book and a book for grown-ups, but it's not a detective story. It is about crime, though, I admit. But it's not a detective story. And it's a bit noir, too. Well, but I did, my first book was a philosophical story. It had nothing to do about crimes. Well, it was about kidnapping, but dark side of me, I guess.
But Minna, you have actually written a book about music, I saw.
Yes, I'm a music journalist, actually, a specialist in classical music. And I've written 3 books about classical music, and I'm working on a book about opera, which is my big passion. And I've just written a libretto for an opera, for the Finnish National Opera. And what was the question?
Yeah, that's fine.
Why about crime?
Always about crime. No. I wanted to write about old people. Many reasons for that. And then my publisher told me, nice idea, but shouldn't there be a plot? And then for some reason I thought the most natural plot for a story happening in a senior center is crime, of course. So that's why they are crime books. But the next one really not a crime book.
I come from biographies and adventure books, and then I moved to crime, because that's more challenging than biographies. But when you write crime, you get a lot for free, because people go and buy a book, and if there is a mystery and it's solved, and that's what they get, that's okay. So you get away with a lot of sloppy writing. So I really want to move to just novels, because then when people buy it, when they start reading, they don't know what to expect. So you really have a challenge to get them into the story and keep them there. So when I said I will return to finance, but not crime. My characters will probably in the finance, literature type of world.
Finance and crime is also pretty closely related, right?
Yes.
Is there anybody who has a last question here? Down there in the corner, I think I saw under all the light. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Nina, and I have been a bit of crime story readers, but this question has been a great curiosity for me. Has it ever happened that a criminal gave you feedback without disclosing his name? That he also happened to read your book, he liked some of the ideas, or he gave you better ideas, admitting that he's a criminal, but not his name, of course.
The acoustics are very, they sort of echo all the time.
Did you ever get a feedback from a criminal without, of course, he telling you the name, that he's a criminal, of course, and liked your books, or the idea in your book?
I have a neighbor who is working in a jail. She's a teacher there, and she told me that there was something that they had to do something, the prisoners, and she was reading my book while they were working, and she was laughing all the time. And then the prisoner said, "What are you reading?" And there's a book by this Lindgren. Lindgren is actually a very common name among the prisoners in Finland. And then, wow, it's one of us, read loud. And then she started to read aloud my books, and they said, this is good, and they loved it.
Well, a session on crime literature can't end somewhere more suitable than in a prison, so thank you very much for all of you.